The International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to immediately stop its military offensive in Rafah.
The court considers that in conformity with its obligations.
The ICJ presiding judge said the decision comes in response to the worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza. He said Israel has not been doing enough to minimize suffering as it continues its operation into Rafah. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the ICJ ruling fully aligns with Canada's stance on the war, and he had strong words for Israel.
Unfortunately, the Netanyahu government is creating barriers and blockages to ever being able to create or even imagine that two-state solution. That is where we fundamentally disagree with the Netanyahu government, even as we continue to support the rights of the State of Israel and also the aspirations of the Palestinian people.
Bob Rae is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, and he joins us now. Ambassador Rae, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
I'm looking for a little bit of clarity on Canada's position on this ruling. We heard from the Prime Minister today, and he repeated Canada's position of the need for an immediate ceasefire and extra humanitarian relief, but I didn't hear him say Israel must comply with the ruling of the ICJ. Is that Canada's position right now, that Israel must immediately comply with what the International Court of Justice has ordered here?
But it's not what the International Court of Justice is not just for Israel. It's for Hamas. It's called for a release of the hostages, and it's also called for a ceasefire. So I think it's important to emphasize that Canada believes that we all have an obligation to. We're all bound by valid international law, and the International Court of Justice's decisions are valid, and we think countries should comply with it. But at the same time, we also think it's important to stress some practical realities that are currently in play. There are about to become again negotiations over the hostages and over a potential ceasefire. The Americans have indicated that their senior negotiator is flying to the region. So there are, and the Israelis have indicated that they'll participate in those discussions. I think we all have to come to grips with the fact that the level of violence and how it is affecting civilians is of critical importance to everybody. And it should be of critical importance to all the parties, including Hamas and including Israel, because there are clear rules about the impact of war on civilians, and particularly on our obligations to protect children and others who cannot protect themselves. So we need to understand that not just in Gaza, but around the world, these rules are being flaunted all the time. And one of the central weaknesses of international law is the difficulty of an enforcement mechanism. But all of this is to say the law should be observed, but also the practical reality that there needs to be a ceasefire and there needs to be a release of the hostages is something that the court has ordered, and is something now that the parties are considering once again, and Canada believes it's something that should happen.
There is that challenge, though, of the law being observed when it's such an asymmetric thing, that Hamas being a designated terrorist organization, but Israel being a democracy, right? And being...
No. Let's be clear. Hamas has to be bound by these rules as well. Any party that's engaging in this kind of a conflict is bound by the rules of international law. It's not as if they only apply to certain groups or certain people. They apply to everybody. And the issue for all of us to understand is that the taking of the hostages and the holding of dead bodies as hostages, which when you think about it, is just an appalling, horrific atrocity in and of itself. Those things represent ongoing crimes against humanity. And that's something which another court, the International Criminal Court, is considering. And that's a separate discussion. But all of it is the principle that the law is, David, is over and above all of us. It doesn't just apply to some folks and not to others. It applies to everyone.
No, I wasn't suggesting it shouldn't apply to everyone, but I think the expectations of complying with it, I'm not sure what expectations people have that an organization like Hamas would necessarally care what an institution.
I have no way of knowing what they care and don't care about. What I care about is that if you want to pretend to be a government and you have effective control over a territory, you have an obligation to follow the basic principles of humanitarian law, including the laws of war. and those laws are being breached every day by Hamas. And so it is important for everyone to keep reminding themselves that this particular war is the result of the attack by Hamas on innocent civilians in Israel, and that they took hostages, and they took some dead bodies pretending they were hostages. And we need to understand the atrocious nature of that behavior. And that's quite separate from whatever the courts rule and others rule with respect to the conduct of the war in Gaza by Israel. And there we have concerns about the level of civilian loss of life and the level of civilian destruction. And we also have concerns about the difficulty of getting humanitarian supplies into the country, into Gaza. So those are concerns that have been addressed in part in this decision, but there will be other places for it to be addressed, and they can be addressed by the parties when they themselves sit down and talk about what is going to happen with respect to the hostages and with respect to humanitarian access and a ceasefire.
Well, on that, as you say, there will be discussions over the weekend, and see where that goes, because there is, everyone is hoping the hostages do eventually get released and do come home safely. But in the meantime, in terms of responding to this order, Israel has said that this decision by the ICJ goes against its right to self-defense, and that no power is going to stop it from going after Hamas in Gaza. So they're continuing to expand their operations in Rafah, and it feels as if this is not going to curtail that particular operation by the IDF.
Well, we'll see about that. Israel has agreed to meet to discuss with the Americans and others about the possibilities of a ceasefire. But everyone needs to understand, and the Israeli government knows this very, very well, and that is that a justification for responding to an attack does not preclude or get around your obligations to carry out an attack in such a way that it does not unduly affect the civilian life, the lives of children, and the lives of the innocent. And there is no blanket rule that says, well, we're just defending ourselves, we can do whatever we want. And everyone knows that isn't true, and the Israeli government knows it's true. And these are the rules that apply to all of us. They're not easy to apply. It's difficult. The conflict is very intense, and it's very hard. You've got these tunnels and every other way in which Hamas has managed to implicate the entire civilian population in this struggle. But these are the challenges that everyone faces in dealing with this war.
Ambassador, since we last spoke, it was, I believe, right after the shift in the position on the question of recognizing an independent Palestinian state. When your vote at the UN, Canada's vote at the UN, went from no to abstention, and the statement came out saying that there was a willingness to recognize an independent Palestinian state in advance of a completed peace process. Since then, we've seen Ireland, we've seen Spain, we've seen Norway announce that on the 28th they're going to officially recognize a Palestinian state. Belgium, Luxembourg, Portugal, and Slovenia, I believe, are four other countries poised to do that. What do those developments do to the timeline for Canada? In addition, when you look at what's happened with the ICJ and the request for arrest warrants at the ICC?
I honestly think that the position that Canada has taken and has staked out now and is carrying out is the right one. And I think it's one that is not going to be impacted by minute by events. The test for a state is its ability to live up to its international obligations. And the Palestinian Authority insists that it can, and it insists that the only thing preventing it from doing so is Israel. But that misses the point that at this moment in time, Hamas actually controls a great deal of the territory in Gaza, and Hamas is a terrorist organization. So everyone needs to be clear as what is the state that is being recognized. And those countries in Europe that have decided to do this have made their decision to say, well, we know what the state is, and we're quite comfortable to go ahead. We're frankly more interested in practical steps being taken to ensure a stronger capacity on the part of the Palestinian Authority and ensuring that ultimately any state that lives next door to Israel is one that is not going to attack Israel the next day. And I think Israelis have a right to that expectation. We've also made it clear that we don't think the Canadian recognition of the state will necessarily have to wait until, everything is, because the reason for that is because we don't think it's right that our independent judgment as to when we will establish bilateral state-to-state relationships should depend on it solely on Israel's judgment. We think that it's important for Canada to be able to exercise its own judgment and ensure that, in fact, this is moving forward. We're not alone in this. I mean, there are a number of other countries that have taken similar positions to ours. And frankly, even those countries that say they're recognizing it, you say, well, what does that mean apart from the fact that you're going to, instead of having a representative in Ramallah, which we have, they say, well, we're going to have an ambassador. Well, I mean, okay. But the really important thing is we want to make sure that the state that is created is a state that's able to do business in a proper way and is not going to be compromised by a relationship with terrorist organizations. And these are legitimate positions for us to take. They're not hostile to the Palestinian people. We recognize the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. We just think that Canada needs to take the steps that we're going to take without getting knocked about by events and announcements as they get made on a daily basis. We respect other countries' right to make their decisions.
Well, Ambassador,
and we know that they will respect ours as well.
Right. I wonder how complicating, just as a final issue to touch on, the move by Karim Khan, the prosecutor with the International Criminal Court, to seek arrest warrants of the defense minister and the prime minister of Israel. Canada is a big supporter in the international rules-based order this government has been and the importance of multilateralism. I mean, is it Canada's view that should these arrest warrants be issued, that everybody who's signed on to the Rome statutes, which underpin the ICC, should be prepared to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu and Minister Gallant if they come to their countries?
Well, I'm a big one that says don't answer iffy questions. If it starts with an if, then I try not to answer the question. But because I think it takes us down the realm of the hypothetical. The prosecutor has asked for these warrants to be issued, and the court itself has to determine whether it will do so. And the prosecutor's decision to make it public that he's doing this is his decision, and he's not somebody that one can comment on his daily decisions day by day. Does it complicate matters? Well, yeah, life complicates matters, David. It's an ongoing reality. But it's not his job is not to figure out if he's complicating matters or not. He has to figure out whether he thinks this is the right thing to do. He's made his decision, and ultimately the court will have to make their decision, and then we'll all have to make our decisions as to how we respond to that.
Well, once the court makes its decision, though, it's no longer a hypothetical, and Canada will have to take a position, correct?
That's correct. And I'm sure we'll have another conversation on that very day.
Okay. Ambassador Bob Ray, we'll book you to come back once we know what the ICC is doing. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.